we have far more agency in the world than just our consumption choices. And we need opportunities to express that agency. And so how can you create more opportunities for people to express agency? What would you do if you radically trusted people? And if you really, really believe that people you're interacting with can contribute to what you're trying to do in the world, what would you ask for?
For episode 27, my guest is Jon Alexander, who has been described as one of the most thoughtful and challenging critics of consumerism in the world today. He co-founded the UK-based innovation consultancy, the New Citizenship Project, as a vehicle to bring the skills of the creative industries to bear on inspiring people to claim their agency in society as citizens. One thing we don't discuss in this conversation is, as well as his academic and professional achievements, he has represented Great Britain in 2 different sports. I hope that you enjoy this conversation, where we really explore what it means to be a citizen and participate. If you would like to participate in making this podcast happen, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community and sign up to be a monthly patron. We still have a way to go to cover our costs, and we need you to collaborate with us to get there. If you don't have spare cash, but have skills that can support our mission, then come and join us. You are so welcome. For those of you in London, we are co-hosting a very interesting event called Alchemy and Activism on September the 2nd, where we'll be exploring how to take the kaleidoscope of wisdom we have, as well as our personal and collective wounds, and alchemize it all into practical, playful, and grounded action to create a more beautiful future. There is a daytime event for a smaller group, and then an evening event which is open to more, where we will share songs and poems of freedom, hope, and grief. Join us and send your friends. Click on events on our website to find out all the details. I hope to see you there. Welcome to The Future is Beautiful, with me, your host, Amisha Gadiali. On this show, we explore the weave between politics, spirituality, creativity, and sustainability. Every one of us has ideas and personal experiences to share that can lead us to a brighter future. Despite the challenges we face as a global community, or the pressures that we meet in our daily lives, when we stop and dare to dream, to ask ourselves the big questions, and to share what we are already doing, we create the future that we wish to wake up for. That future is beautiful. I'm delighted today to be sat here with Jon. Lovely to see you.
Likewise.
I would love to kind of hear where you feel we've turned into consumers over, the years. Like, this is a topic that's quite dear to me. I actually wrote my dissertation at university 12 years ago, and it was called The Consumer Citizen, and it was actually looking at this demise of citizenship and the rise of the consumer. And then when I see what's happened in the last 12 years, it's it's sort of unrecognisable, this idea of a real citizen in a political system. And I'm interested to know what made you interested in this topic, and what do you see and has been the shift throughout time?
So I guess the way I've come to see the world and kind of where we are right now and these ideas, I think we tend to think of ourselves, think of the way we interact in society as being one where we kind of step between many different roles, where we're consumers and citizens and shareholders and voters and parents and employees and we move between those roles kind of seamlessly, and they're defined by what we're interacting with. So we're parents when we're interacting with children, when we're shareholders when we're interacting with the companies we own, we're citizens when we're doing political stuff, which is kind of challenging right now. We're consumers when we're well, this is the thing, really. The way I see it is actually that's not really how it works. That actually at any given time, one of those ideas kind of elevates above the others and comes to inform them all with its logic. And so the story I tell, so if you hold that idea of the many different roles we play, but then think of something above those, my take is that over the last century, we should, at the end of the 19th century, beginning of the 20th, we were something like subjects, actually. And that as subjects, the right thing, these are kind of moral ideas. They sit above the others, inform them all. So as subjects, the right thing to do was kind of keep your head down, do as you're told, get what you're given. And if everyone did that, then the best society would result. And so in all of those different roles that we might play in our lives, actually, there were a few kind of, there was the aristocracy and and then the many. And that was, and then out of the, in the way I see it, out of the Second World War through the second half of the 20th century, that idea of the subject is more or less deliberately replaced by an idea of the consumer, and I see the consumer as a moral idea, the idea that the right thing to do is to get the best deal for yourself, to look out for number one, to choose the best thing for you from the options that are offered, on the basis that if everyone does that, then the best society will result. And from subject to consumer is quite a liberating shift. But my argument is that what's happening now actually is that we're seeing, kind of slightly differently to the way you just framed it, we're seeing the decline of the consumer, the kind of the fall of that logic, in the same way as subject logic kind of crumbled at the beginning of the 20th century. I think consumer logic is crumbling now, and what's bubbling up and could replace it and is sort of emerging in pockets everywhere. And I know this is language you use, and it's slightly, or sort of a thesis you have in a slightly different way as well, is that those pockets don't necessarily see themselves as part of the same thing or know what one another's doing, but there's something forming that I think is something like the citizen. So if subject is keep your head down, do as you're told, consumers look out for number one, get best deal for yourself, citizen is something like get involved, like shape the context of your own life, become be an agent, like an interdependent agent of your own destiny rather than just a chooser of the options that someone else has designed. And so my take is kind of optimistic, but quite long-term optimistic. So in the same, like the subject, like it kind of, I'm not saying this is what's going to be necessary, but in this shift, but the shift from subject to consumer arguably took 2 world wars. And for that idea to fully emerge, for the structures and institutions that retain the idea of people as subjects to kind of fully be broken down and start to be redesigned, and that's a painful process. But if this idea of the citizen, I do think it's emerging. I do think there's a very positive potential in the moment we live in. But I also see the structures and institutions and kind of the infrastructure of the idea of the consumer is so strong that it's really quite hard for that idea to break through and form its own. So that at a kind of really theoretical level is how I see it, like subject, consumer, citizen, from sort of people who have stuff done to them to people who have stuff done for them to people who do it with you, like, and from dependent to independent to interdependent. Like, I see those things, but I don't think it's easy, and I don't think it's a given that it will make that transition with immediately or seamlessly, or, well, I don't think we will make it seamlessly, but yeah, that's how I kind of see it.
It's a really interesting way of looking at it, and I mean, I guess it's quite, I'm like referring to like a university dissertation many years ago, and I think what I was thinking about then was how, in terms of our participation in politics, that we were like more citizen-like, as in we belonged to political parties and we took part in that way. And our identity was quite often formed based on the party that we were in and, the party that our family was in and what that represented in terms of our values. And that what I've seen is that over time, our way of forming our identity and our values got completely taken away from the political parties. And now it's 2%, even with the Corbyn surge, that are members of political parties in the UK. But what I like about what you're saying is actually what these words mean in a much bigger sense of how we interact with the system,
with each other, with the world,
with each other, with the power in the world. And I have never thought of myself as a subject before, but of course we do have a royal family.
Yeah, there's that too, right? There's a whole nother layer.
We are subjects still.
Technically, yeah.
Technically.
I think that the political sphere is a really interesting one. So if you cast that lens across it, like there was a time, and I guess the rise of the Labour Party, the Labour movement, is arguably tied up with the kind of breakdown of the subject logic. And it's one of the things I've been digging into a lot recently is what happened in that shift from subject to consumer, and how did that happen, and what were the dynamics. And there's some really fascinating stuff, and arguably like so just put political party membership across that lens quickly, and then maybe it might be fun to dig into that. Absolutely. The political evolutions a bit more. But party membership for a start, like I think party membership was kind of quite tribal for quite a long time, right? Like you sign up to something and those are your dictats. Like it's like you've adopted a dogma. And in a way, I'd position that almost as a subject logic. Yeah. It's like I have become a subject of this logic.
Absolutely.
and then became a kind of a bit more of a consumer thing, where it's like which of these political parties is the brand that best suits you. And the kind of New Labour phenomenon was very much the sort of the sort of either the apotheosis or the kind of, but it was a real zenith of that. And you were like choose between these things, like, and I've argued in my own thesis world that the kind of the liberal idea of the citizen to some extent kind of inevitably descends to the consumer, because you've gone from a conception of citizenship that is about this kind of active participation to one that makes voting the kind of the primary interaction, and then you're like, well, actually voting becomes almost the maximum rather than the minimum. And voting is I would argue a kind of as a consumer choice. It's like, or certainly, and the framing of it became increasingly. I remember in the Scottish referendum, first of the many of recent times, that I remember switching on the news just coming up to it, and it was a day, wasn't there, where I think Douglas Alexander came on and said that Scottish citizens would be £1,000 better off if they stay in the union. And then Alex Salmond the same day released a report saying they'd be £1,400 better off leaving the union. And you're like, and then there was a journalist from The Economist on a panel saying, well, the Scottish consumers have a choice. And they were like, hang on, that's a Freudian slip there. You didn't mean, like, the idea is a kind of consumer choice about which route is in my individual self-interest, and measured primarily financially and materially, rather than and like without getting too far into whether that's right or wrong or whatever. But it's really interesting that framing had come in, that you're like, this is a choice about material, short-term, narrow self-interest financially, rather than kind of a discussion about what's best for the nation, or where do we want to go, or who do we want to be, and so I think. Sorry, a bit of a ramble, but you go back to that idea of political party membership, it's like, or the way politics works. I'd argue where we are now is we're in the kind of dying threshes of a consumer era of democracy, where choosing between the options that someone else has designed is the primary means of interaction in politics. And actually, what's bubbling is a much more participatory democracy. And you can see this in experiments and initiatives all around the world. But I would argue that I don't necessarily see a decline in political party membership as a decline in political engagement necessarily. It's a decline in engagement with politics as it works at the moment. We have this thing where we talk about, a lot of organisations we work with come to us and say, well, people aren't participating. And we're like, no, people aren't participating in the old ways. People don't come to our AGM does not mean people don't want to be involved. Mm-hmm. It means people don't want to come to your AGM because it's dull. Like, we have to, yeah. So that, I suppose that would be my take on that. And then, the idea of and I think that's to me that's the great unanswered question is and the really exciting space is how do we step into an entirely different a very different idea of how politics might work. And I think the Irish referendum was a really interesting example and kind of case in point of a referendum where the terms of that referendum were essentially developed by a citizens' assembly, by a participatory process, then interacting with a choice process, a co-design process, setting up a choice process, and you wonder what we might have been able to do if Brexit was like that or whatever. But whether we go there this early in the podcast, but
well, I mean, Brexit is very present.
Yeah. No, I mean, my people sometimes say to us as an organisation called the New Citizenship Project that you get the kind of democracy's not exactly got a good rep at the moment, and the take I put back is just as I've said, like Brexit was a consumer version of democracy. It was that someone went off and got to two quite shit options, and then the only role for people was to choose between those two slightly rubbish options, rather than a dynamic process of what's the relationship we want, how could we have the relationship with Europe that we want, how might that work, and if you think about the way the Irish referendum developed, the terms that developed, there are clues, but we didn't do that, and so to decry a referendum as I think referenda in and of themselves, they could be a useful tool, but they're part of a toolkit rather than identifying them as democracy it's in raw form. It's just the sort of the ultimate descent to consumer choice rather than a real interaction. So that would be my take.
And then also when we're consuming politics, consumerism often has a play of fear at the heart of it. And so instead of actually providing space to be like, what are the things that we're scared about? Where are we worried about the future? What does being in Europe or not being in Europe say about what we need to address? Rather than actually using those fears in order to kind of manipulate a vote that...
Yeah, and I mean, it's where do you start, isn't it? You could go, but to a lot of the ideas I work with are about if you're thinking of people as citizens rather than consumers, then actually the entire structures of the questions you ask yourself are different. Thinking of people as consumers leads you naturally into a kind of binary where it's sort of which of these is better, or do you want this, yes or no? Whereas thinking of people as citizens goes, well, you're sort of the scaffolding you're erecting in your brain is scaffolding that says, well, actually, people can help us figure out what the right answer is, or what we might do here. And so the questions you ask aren't binaries; they're generative questions. They're the sort of design thinking questions. How might we get to the best place, and what input and ideas can we bring into that, rather than a consumer thing that says people are only capable of choosing between stuff, so we have to get to the options and then offer the choice. You're coming from it's an entirely different kind of question. It's a different order of question that you're asking that leads to a very different process. So that'd be, and I think in that way you're, to your thing about fear, like you in a consumer mindset, you take people's place almost as static, where you're like this is what those people are like. What do they fear? What do they hope for? What do they? Whereas if you're thinking of people as citizens, you see that as dynamic, and you're like, how can we create something together? Like what? And you're looking forward. You're going. What might be possible, rather than what do we want from here? It's what might we build together, kind of thing. That's like fundamentally all of this comes back to the moment when I started to think of stuff in these terms, first for me the consumer citizen thing was the obsession. So I worked in advertising for over a decade and gradually was asking more and more questions about what the role of this story of who we are is in our lives. And there's stats, I don't know the exact number, but there's stats that suggest that we're exposed to something like 3,000 commercial messages a day, each of which has the underlying message, you are a consumer. And then if you think about like what the priming impact of this is in the age of kind of understanding priming and social psychology and so forth, like when we surround ourselves with that story, what are the things that are programmed into that? And so we've been involved in various experiments where we did things like surveys of environmental and social attitudes, where consumer response study is the front cover for half the sample, and citizen response study the front cover for the other half, and you get lower environmental and social motivation. We've done ones on trust and willingness to compromise in scenarios, and when you use the word consumer as a framing, as the noun for people, instead of people or households or citizens or participants or whatever, you get lower levels of trust and lower levels of willingness to compromise. And this is the point we start from in our work is like when we have that language in organisations, in institutions, wherever, in newspapers, then the scaffolding, like I say, I think of language as not just as words, but as kind of as the scaffolding that you build everything on. And if the scaffolding you've put in place is consumer, then the ideas you build are choices rather than creative opportunities, should we say. It's not, I think of, like I say, back to that thing of like the sub roles and the big role. It's like, it's not about, one of the ways we put it is what we are today, I would argue, is consumers who vote. Like the identity construct is the consumer and the act is the vote. So you bring that identity construct to bear on that action. What we might become is citizens who consume. Like it's not, the problem isn't consumption, the problem is the idea of the consumer. And that's what we try and play with.
So how do we deconstruct that idea in ourselves?
In ourselves?
Yeah.
As individuals?
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about our friends listening. If they're going, oh wow, I'm a consumer, and wanting to make that shift in themselves.
It's interesting. I mean, the place I think what I'm most interested in is how we then embody that in the systems and structures that we're part of, rather than, I think in a way the logic of the consumer mindset says, well, my impact is as an individual, and I think that in itself is one of the patterns you have to break out of. So the question I would want to sow with people is like, where do you work, and where is the consumer mindset present in your work? The people who are listening to your podcast, I know, are going to be extraordinary people of all sorts. Or what community are you part of? Or like, and those are the places where I think, what would this organisation, what would this community do if we thought of people as fundamentally able and wanting to contribute to it? Rather than just going to kind of, what I'm fighting against, I guess, is the. So I'm not a great fan of the kind of of ethical consumption will save the world. Mm-hmm. I think that the work I want to do and the work I believe is about saying, actually, we have part of this thing of a shift from consumer to citizen is going, actually, we have far more agency in the world than just our consumption choices. And we need opportunities to express that agency. And so how can you create more opportunities for people to express agency? And I like whether that's, that's the thing I would want to show with people. So, but and sort of without copping out of the question, the reason why we turned the Citizenship Project into a consultancy is because. So step back a sec. I start from kind of two fundamental assumptions about human nature. The first is that we are by nature collaborative, empathic creatures as much if not more than we are competitive, status-driven creatures. Like we want to collaborate, we want to work together, we want to do stuff, we want to make things better. And the second is that we're fundamentally shaped by the stories that we surround ourselves with. And I would argue that those two are in conflict at the moment. So we are collaborative, empathic creatures, but we surround ourselves with a story that tells us that we're all consumers and that we're all out for number one. And some really interesting data from Tom Crompton, Common Cause Foundation, worth looking into. But they've done some survey work where they asked people there's a thing called the Schwartz values orientation matrix or something like that. But they asked people and it compares kind of universalist or benevolent values orientation with sort of intrinsic values orientation with extrinsic, so sort of more material values orientations, and they found that 70% of people, I think the numbers are roughly right, 77%, I think it was, of people say they prioritise sort of universalist values, compassionate values over values of self-interest, but 74% think that other people prioritise self-interest over benevolent. So and as a result of that disconnect, they act as if they're not bothered by the compassionate values because they don't want to be victims of free rider syndrome. Mm-hmm. So that I would argue is the truth of. I think that's a really powerful insight into why we might be where we are. It's like we care deeply about one another and about the future we could build together, but we are very scared of being taken for mugs.
It makes sense.
One of the other ways I've framed this, and sorry, where I was going was the thing of like what the reason why we've become a consultancy of sorts rather than maybe a movement builder or sort of working with individuals more directly, is because I think is that second thing. It's like what's the story that we surround ourselves with and who generates that story, and a lot of that story is created and sustained by organisations and institutions and brands and governments, and that's where the story of the consumer is coming from. It's not coming from us as individuals, as it were. It's coming from the things that we built. And so if we can intervene here, the theory of change isn't we need to condition people to be citizens. The theory of change is we are by nature citizens. We just need to get all the crap out of the way that's telling us not to be. And allow better nature to come through, kind of thing. So that's why we've created an organisation that's more focused on how can you work with the Guardian, the National Trust, Barclays, whoever, to kind of get them talking to people differently, because then they'll create space and agency for people rather than saying shush little people, just go shopping, which is. So
then I guess what you're saying is the answer to that question of, what our friends listening can do as their own shift is to look at where in their lives they've fallen into a consumer ideology, observe what stories they are immersed in, and be courageous and step into agency.
And create agency for others. Mm-hmm. Like, one of the ways we framed it before is like, what would you do if you radically trusted people? Like, if you really believed, and if you really, really believed that people you're interacting with can contribute to what you're trying to do in the world, what would you ask for? Like, and again, and sorry, like call me back to individual if you want. Like one of the things that really struck me recently, I was reading Beth Simone Novak, who's the Obama's chief technology officer in the US government. She wrote a book called Smart Citizen, Smarter State, which is very associated with this logic. But one of the things she writes about is trust, and she says this thing about there's all number of studies that will show you that levels of trust in institutions are declining. But there's no surveys anywhere that tell you what's happening of levels of trust of the institutions in the people. Because, and her point being, like, trust is a reciprocal, right? Like, when we're shown so little respect, we respond in kind. So if you have any levers or any voice from an organisation out into the world, then can you shape that voice differently? Can you talk? Can you give back control? And be sort of generous and trusting with that. And obviously you have to design that very carefully. I'm not naive, but that's that sort of leap of faith of like, people can contribute to this. People can contribute to what you're doing. And if you frame that, you have to frame it really well. This is the thing, like one of the I'm quite interested in how media and newspapers and so forth work at the moment, and there's the comment boxes are not human nature at their best, right?
Comment boxes are scary.
And you're like, but some of that I would argue is a framing thing, like, and one of the I've come across we've been studying and talking to, and like there's a Dutch news brand called The Correspondent, and they have this philosophy. They say we don't call them journalists, we call them conversation leaders, and we don't call them readers, we call them expert contributors. And you're invited to you're not anonymous for a start, but you're also and there's much more space on the page for the contributions, which in itself is an interesting reframe of a comment, right? And then but you're invited to say what capacity you're contributing in. What's your expertise in this? We expect you to be coming from somewhere useful in this, or even if it's informal or whatever, it doesn't mean you have to be a PhD to comment. It just means, and the quality of interaction they find is something that really contributes to what they're trying to do, rather than if you just frame it as like, right, we're the clever ones, and then there's a little box at the bottom. Then of course I'm going to throw stones at you because your implicit assumption is that I'm a plonker and you're the clever one. Whereas the correspondent's implicit assumption is we've got some of the information and we're going to pursue this further, but we know you can help. And I think, and like I say, I don't want to appear naive and this is a very difficult design challenge because we don't have the answers yet, because this is a different way of thinking, I think, and you can't do it. You can't just flip a switch. You can't just flip some kind of utopian switch and be like, right, we're there. Which goes back again at the highest level to this thing of like the structures and the structures and processes that took 2 world wars to break down of the subject logic. Like, those things are stubborn.
It's interesting. You kind of got me on this idea of trust and radical trust.
Yeah.
And I'm like trying to imagine what the world would be like, what my experience of the world would be like if I had that. And then at the same time, I feel like with institutions in particular and media, especially having, worked on a referendum campaign, for example.
Of course, I was forgetting. Yeah.
I did go into some of those situations with trust, and I really did get
burnt
is a word.
It's a word. It's not wrong word. It's possibly not strong enough.
Yeah. But then when one does feel a level of trust in an organisation or in a setting or in a community, it does radically change what it brings out in everyone involved. Yeah, it's really interesting.
It's like we've become so used to designing for mistrust that we actually don't really know how to design with trust. And yeah, because it doesn't, the thing is, it doesn't mean, I almost wonder if it might be fun to like think about the future is beautiful in this light. Like, what is it that you're asking people for? Like, and how could, and because like, how could people really contribute? The thing, and because if the ask isn't framed and people kind of promote themselves and don't give you the financial resource, is there a way of framing those asks that might make the financial contribution more likely and a useful contribution? But if the only interaction I'm offered with you is to fund you, then I'm not really involved. So you might want to wipe this and take it a different direction. I'm cool with that. But it's like, quite, in a way, it might be quite useful. It's like, because that just feels like you're the only agent in this, and I'm just giving you money to crack on. And then if you don't, but then people kind of self-promote it. So what is useful? How can people help you take it in a direction? Can people nominate? Can people, I don't know, how might you frame those asks? Like, what would really be useful to make this a thing that would blow holes in the world? Like, I don't know. It's that's the sort, and like I say, it's not a simple. It's not like I've got the answers ready to land. I think New Citizenship Project would be significantly better off financially if I did. but it's that question.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm very open to other ways of doing this and looking at this, and this has stemmed from a participatory project.
Yeah.
That's really the heart of what this is, and this whole project was started because I wanted everyone that came into contact with it to actually realise that what they feel, what they think, what they see, what they want matters, and that we're all creating it, and help us get on board with what your vision, but more than anything, trust that your vision matters. Take time to actually feel into what your vision is, and that's definitely been the essence of this project. And then what's interesting is you get into, I've worked on this project now for 8 years. I have never paid myself for any of the work, and I've paid other people and for things out of my own money along the way. It's been quite stressful at times, and it's definitely had an impact on my life that sometimes is not that positive, and then other times I'll have a conversation with someone, or I will meet someone on the street, or someone will read the book and they will they'll do something in their community, or they'll write and they'll share that they did something and it changed the way that they thought about what was possible. And you're like, okay, great. I don't know why I feel like it's up to me to help to ask this question. But somehow it is. And then what's interesting with the podcast is essentially, self-promotion is inevitable. It's an inevitable part of it. Everyone has a message that is on the show, and part of why I'm doing it is because I want to share the messages that people have that are on the show, and mainstream media isn't really telling those stories or giving space to those stories, or if they are, they're also editing it and putting it into some quite kind of crude,
nuggetizing,
crude ways, and actually having had friends that are written about and their projects are written about in the press, and you just read it and you're just like, oh god, it's really not,
where's the joy of that
quite
gone?
What we're trying to say, or kind of strips it down to something really simple, and we do live in a complex time. And so for me, the balance with this is, what I want for this show is to be elevating the stories that we don't get a lot of exposure to.
Yep.
And I would like that to be, stories of all kinds of people that are citizens in the world, in their community, that are doing something interesting, that are challenging the status quo. And then I have this challenge. If I don't have anyone listening to the podcast, then I'm not able to elevate those stories.
Yep.
Because we're just making something that no one's listening
Yep.
to. So there's a challenge of, mixing in people that people have heard of that help to bring a bigger audience, and also, obviously have a very interesting way of looking at the world.
Sure.
With people that no one's heard of, with making it open for people to participate, but then also managing that I'm just one person and I'm doing this a few days a week unpaid. And so what I would do if this was a full-time thing and I had a full-time team in terms of participatory action would be completely different to what I'm able to do without those resources. And it is a challenge, and I don't know the answers, and I'm definitely very open to them, to what they might be. And in a way, this has become quite a traditional. The book wasn't. The book has over 200 voices in it. It's completely free to download.
Yeah.
Anyone could take part in it. The anyone was limited to who I could reach to tell that they could take part in it. And I did my best at standing on streets and turning up at events and writing to people to make that a big mix of people. But of course it was limited by who I could get to. And then the podcast is quite a traditional way of media. It's quite consumer based, right? I've chosen to come and have a conversation with you.
Yep.
People listening are choosing to listen and consume the information.
Versus all of the other things they could be listening to. Yeah.
Right. And they're consuming the information, the ideas. Of course, our intention is that we're not just
you're
telling
providing
them
something
how it
that
is.
people
We're
can then
providing
work
something
with.
Exactly. To think about, to work with, to reframe in order for them to feel... Sorry, I didn't mean to say in order for them. In order for you. In order for you listening to feel more open and to have a different story and to have a different framework to relate in your lives to.
No, and there's so many of the issues we kind of work with are wrapped up in the stuff you've just said. And just to be clear, there's no way I'm kind of oversimple. Like I say, I'm not naive. I know this stuff is difficult, but there's some really interesting things. Perhaps the greatest single challenge of this is how does this work sustain itself? There's a very clear business model in the consumer era. And basically it's selling ads, right? And for pretty much everything, or selling stuff, and to some extent that some of that may continue, but you are saying that we're probably coming from a mindset where the primary expression of identity is consumption, and making that less primary, and therefore you would. I mean, part of it is kind of part of the hope, I guess, is that consumption, in aggregate consumption, might likely decrease if it's less significant as the kind of expression of identity. But what does that mean? So how do we sustain ourselves? How does it? And that those questions are really difficult. I mean, to put it in cast, it's sort of much bigger. Like the way The Correspondent did it is they crowdfunded before it was even created. So it's like, this is what we believe is needed. It will only happen if you chip in. And that sort of conditionality is quite an interesting thing of this work. But there's a kind of a threat to that, which feels odd, right? How is that part of this?
Yeah.
And then...
And it's interesting because I thought about doing that for this podcast, but then I thought, well, is that true?
Yeah.
Because I actually want this to exist in the world.
Yeah.
I want to be able to share the ideas of the people that I'm talking to, and I will probably do it anyway, which is not really it doesn't really fit into
That's not that
the
logic.
model,
Yeah, exactly. If there's not a market for this, it's still going to happen. And
because what does there being a market for it mean? You know, because how, like, that's thinking in a certain framework, whereas actually what I found is that people have listened that didn't know that they were looking for this and have discovered something.
And that's where arguably you're kind of building a community or a movement around something rather than satisfying a market for something, satisfying a pre-existing market for something. And that's part of the genius. But again, back to the question, like, how do you then sustain that? Like, how do you do it without, how do you create the things that people feel like that offer people an opportunity to buy into it? One of the dynamics we talk about a lot is that in this world you're trying to create, in this way of thinking of people, you're trying to create ways for people to buy into what you're doing rather than just and help you do it, rather than you crack on and do it and then people buy the output of it from you. And so that and that takes you. So if you think of so Brewdog, for example, one of the fastest growing businesses in the country, like, have done some really interesting stuff on this. So, like, when they decide they're gonna try and do hotels, not just bars, they kind of crowdfund the first one. But they also run a kind of a brewing cooperative that is part of their R&D structure, where the shareholders can contribute to things. They also kind of teach people about brewing, so they support this program called the Cicerone, and you can see a lot of we've broken this down in what we call 7 modes of everyday participation. In kind of, everyone does this, right? We create, it's either 3, 5, or 7, and it's a tool. So, and I'm not saying it's just crowdfunding, right? Like, it's contributing ideas, it's giving time, it's like, but all of those things require input. Like, you don't just. And arguably the correspondence model requires an awful lot more of their journalists than most journalistic models do, because you have to be both expert and interrogator and facilitator. Similarly with Brewdog's brewers, like, they don't just get to sit, like, they have to be, all their recipes are open sourced. They kind of, like, they're looking for ideas all the time. Those people are going out and trying to not just repeating the same recipe, turning it out as Anheuser-Busch or whatever can do. And so, you know, that's really difficult. But equally there is it's sort of, if you can step into it and find the ways to do it, then there are many different there are potentially ways that it can. So I suppose what I'm trying to balance is I can sort of imagine lots of things that could be done, but I also know that all of those things individually require work. And we're in this ourselves, right? As New Citizenship Project, we could be doing many more things than we are. We could be creating a community of professionals who want to be skilled want to kind of learn these skills and work in these ways, and that would probably dramatically increase our impact. I want to do that, but on a day-to-day basis, a client paying us for a consultancy project that only they will ever see is much more viable, and will make sure that my team get paid at the end of the month more readily than creating that thing. For you, like, you know that there are things that you want to do, but
so many things, but it's hard. So, and it's that, I think that's a bit of a symptom of where we are right now, that it's not quite, we're not quite in this new story yet, that we can sort of see it and touch it and almost taste it, but we're not quite there. Yeah, because with the book and the early years of this project, it was very open, you know, not that it's not so open now, but just that I'm not pushing that openness so much.
Yeah.
Because what I found happened with that book is that I tried to share the ownership of it. Like, I was like, here's an idea, and, like, let's all make it together. But I was left with the ownership of it.
Yeah.
And somehow that real feeling of, yes, we made this together, and the sharing of it was left to me, which is interesting. Like, I don't know if I just did it wrong somehow, or if it's just that we are still economic beings, and so that's kind of where our energy goes. So people are like, yeah, I helped on that project, that was great. Actually, I didn't get paid on that project, so I'm kind of annoyed with that project. And then, like, you know, and then it kind of moves on. And actually, I think what I've done with this podcast is modelled trust. I'm like, okay, I'm going to make it. You know, we have enough listeners that if everyone gave £1 a month, we would have plenty of money to make this show really good. And I have a trust that will happen. I thought it would happen quicker than it has. I trusted that it would happen quicker.
Yeah. Ultimate faith.
I'm just keeping that trust open, that okay, maybe it's slower than that, and that also recognising that everyone's asking for money these days. So you know, a lot of people are crowdfunding, and not just people that literally don't have any money for the project that they're working on, such as this one, but companies are crowdfunding projects when they do actually have money.
Well, the Brewdog example, and you're like, guys, like, what? Was the 4.5 million that you raised from the equity round not enough for you to try that one without having to do this too?
Right, but then they're crowdfunding with a massive marketing budget for the crowdfund,
which is another whole thing.
And so, is the crowdfund real? Like, because they're essentially paying to crowdfund.
You already know that you've got it, but you're. So I mean, so for a start, I will do my £1 a month as a past listener who hasn't yet subscribed.
Great, this whole conversation was worth it. We've got £12 more a year.
Come on, it's happening. But I think going back to that sort of situation analysis piece, like that's another dynamic of the crazy place we are right now, right? Like this who's co-opting whom is a question that I'm really like in this moment when if we're right in this analysis, then the kind of decline, the kind of collapse of consumer logic is intensifying, right? Trump is the kind of apotheosis of a consumer president. He's like the CEO of the nation, serving the nation, and you're like, but it's breaking, but it's still the dominant story, and the more it breaks, the weirder the dynamics get. At the same time as you're trying to build these things, as we're trying to build these things, and the sort of competition between those two stories, which are existing at one and the same time, is intensifying, and it's like, oh, it's really hard. It's really hard. But yeah, so are Brewdog co-opting the idea of citizenship, or are they inhabiting it? Are the correspondent, are the Guardian in their kind of contribution model, are like who's And is it? I mean, I kind of maybe I don't think naively. Having like I say worked in advertising for a long time. I've seen advertising approaches co-opt an awful lot of the dynamics of positive emerging dynamics. But I tend to think that this one is one that if we're right about this underlying thing of human nature. And I think we are, like there's plenty of evidence from animal behaviour and all that stuff, and spiritual teachings as well, right? That we are these collaborative empathic creatures. Then when the kind of the existing world starts to open the space for that, I think it's the sort of the current dominant system that will become co-opted by that idea of who we are, rather than vice versa. But maybe but I think we're in that moment. And like I say, you go back to the shift from subject to consumer, and you had 2 world wars. Like these are major disruptions, and I'm looking into it at the moment and studying. Like, 'cause I want to write the book at some stage, right? Once I've made sure that my business partner has a
crowdfund it.
Crowdfund the book. Come on. Right. Like, what's the right way to do it? So we've just been helping out. I highly recommend, if you haven't come across it, a book called New Power, Jeremy Hymans and Henry Timms, and we did some of the research for this book. So Jeremy was one of the co-founders of Avaz. Henry runs 92Y in New York, and he's the guy behind the Giving Tuesday campaign. Like, they're really good guys. New Power, great book, really. They deliberately went down a old, like, for a book called New Power, their publishing contract was a big publisher, like, book deal before you start, book tour, like, it wasn't crowdfunded, it wasn't, like, it didn't, in the classic way, the medium didn't match the message, and they kind of knew that they were doing that, but that in itself is a really fascinating thing. You're like, how do you, in this moment, how do you, like, one of the ways I've thought about this, the work that we do is like, you're trying to say what needs to be said in a way that can be heard, right? You're like, how do we speak from here, from the news, from what's emerging into what's dominant? And I think that's a really difficult challenge, but it's probably, and we were talking before you started recording about Alexa Clay and the kind of the misfit economy stuff, and the idea that the ways of working to change a system, you can kind of hermit yourself and try and create a system outside the system. You can campaign and try and attack the system. You can be an entrepreneur and try and work from within it to just sort of soften it slightly, or you can be a pirate, kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out, trying to stretch the boundaries and change. I like the pirate thing, as I was saying, but those ways of working are all important and valid, but how you do it, how you sustain that work, how you carry it through so that you really change things is, I guess, it's the great unanswered. But yeah, just, I mean, that thing about the shift from subject to consumer, like the some of the things I've been reading about, like how the decline of the aristocracy at the end of the 19th century or through the 19th century, and then the moment of utter untenability of a subject story, of a story that the right thing for people to do is keep their heads down and do what they're told in the trenches, like when people were thrown together in that way. And yet, out of the First World War, there's this amazing piece from 7 Pillars of Wisdom, Lawrence of Arabia's book, where he says, we live many lives in those whirling campaigns, but then the old men came out and remade the world in the shape of the former one they knew. And he says, youth had won but had not learned to keep. And it's this thing, like, there could have been a new idea of who we were, but it got clunked down and only, arguably was co-opted again after the Second World War. But there's that moment of trying to shape the new rules is so difficult to see from where we are, but I think it's.
And have you done any kind of future gazing into how we need to make that next step fully?
Only in the sense of not in a kind of like 20, 30 year view, what would it look like? We tried to work with appreciative inquiry as an approach rather than kind of future casting, I guess, which is to say, I think this is happening. One of the ways we talk about our theory of change, which can sound a bit, but we talk about social acupuncture, like how, like, the energy is in the system, but how do you release it? And appreciative inquiry is about that. It's like, where is this already happening that you can kind of name it and show it what it really is and help it all come together and do more. I mean, this is what this podcast is as well, right? Like, this is why I was really keen when you said do you want to do it. I was like, I think we're doing the same work in a lot of ways.
Totally.
But I don't know if we can. I think there are clues, and I think there are sort of ways of thinking. Like, I really like Michael Sandel, the Harvard philosopher, makes this distinction between a market economy and a market society, and he says we can have a market economy within society, but we can't have a market. But market society was fundamentally flawed, and I quite like that. For me, that to me is the sort of counterpoint to consumers who vote becoming citizens who consume, and some of those notions I think I sort of have, but I tend to also see it as, like, how do we build around better Reykjavik, this great digital thing where citizens of the city of Reykjavik any citizen can propose an idea for how the city would be better, and they get upvoted and downvoted, and there's a special session in the city council where they have to be debated every month. And because of that explicit power relationship, because there is genuine power to those ideas, there's genuine trust in those ideas together, 70% of the population of Reykjavik have interacted with it. Now, the cynic would say, well, Reykjavik's a pretty easy place, like there's 150,000 citizens and they're all relatively homogeneous. And they're right, but equally there are things to be, that there is something there that feels like that feels like it could be built around. So I prefer to, rather than future cast, kind of go what's already here that can, and what does it add up to? What might it add up to, and what's emerging, and sort of what's the next step? Having a compass rather than a map, as it were. Mm-hmm. So we can recognise what's not part of it.
Yeah, it's interesting because we've been talking a bit about this project, and got my mind into that, and I think it's interesting to share this thought process and journey with all of our friends listening, because, you know, if you've never created something like this or put up a podcast or whatever, you don't know what goes into it, and how much thought goes into trying to move us out of the system that we're in the parameters of the system that we are in. It's a confusing situation, and you know, I was thinking, like, I'd love for this to be like a participatory podcast. People interviewed other people that they thought were really interesting, and we edited that and like mashed it all together, and like it would be amazing. But what I experienced with the book was that actually a lot of what I had to do was coach everyone who took part in it to have self-belief in their role of writing down a vision of the future, in the idea that they mattered. And I was really surprised, because a lot of the people that I asked that, you know, they weren't doing it, and I was bugging them, like, no, you said you'd write, why haven't you done it? Why haven't you done it? And then, you know, eventually I'd get to this, like, oh, I just don't really know what to say. And I'm like, what? Like a social entrepreneur, like running this whole like thing, like, of course you know what you want to say. And they're like, no, I don't know, like, they're really hard questions, like, you know, what is it that we really want?
Yeah.
Because we don't really trust that frame exists, because we're so entrenched in another story.
One of the sort of darker ways that I've thought about what consumerism is, what this story is, that you're sort of speaking to a bit, is like, I've done a lot of study of slave systems, in going way back in a different guise in my life, but there's this really powerful concept they call the internalization of inferiority, which is, it's not rocket science, right? It's the idea that for a majority to remain oppressed by a minority or by themselves, that they have to believe in their own inferiority. They have to sustain that belief. And sometimes I do think of the idea of the consumer as that sort of concept. Like, it's an idea that says that we're not good enough to fix the problems of the world, that all we are capable of is just choosing between the stuff on the shelf. And I think that at the deepest level, I do think it is a crisis of self-belief. It's a kind of, can we do this? And like you think of, I've like analogies between kind of Stalinist statuary and 96 sheet billboard ads. Like, it's not a particularly like stretching metaphor, really. There was this ad a few years back, probably about 2012 or so, by the Rainforest Alliance, called "Follow the Frog," and the idea that, like, so what happens? A guy kind of bothered by the destruction of the rainforest, and he's his computer at work watching a film on YouTube or something, and he gets up and he storms out and he goes goes home and grabs his stuff, goes off, gets on a plane, goes to the Amazon, and this is soon after Avatar came out, and it kind of becomes part of the tribe, fights the Western, loses badly, gets beaten up, trails home, kind of dishevelled wreck, to find his wife's left him, and all this stuff. And then the sort of payoff moment is the line like, follow the frog, but buy Rainforest Alliance products, Rainforest Alliance certified products with the frog icon on them. Follow the frog so you don't have to do the things you shouldn't do anyway. And the kind of the message of that, don't be an activist, don't do stuff, don't it's quite literally, I describe it as shush little people, just go shopping. It's like leave the big stuff to the grown-ups, and it is that, and that was celebrated kind of as a great piece of environmental communication, showing that the environmentalists could have fun too, and you're like that's. And it taps into what it's really doing, I would argue, is tapping into this kind of deep crisis of belief. And so yeah, where do you go from there? You kind of have to see it as a story, that story of the consumer as one that says that we aren't is us telling ourselves. I don't think it's a kind of plot from outside telling ourselves that we're not up to it. But then you go back to and then that can feel really heavy and actually quite disempowering. But then for me, one of the kind of lightest moments of my work was when not, instead of just holding up consumer and citizen, start to think about the subject story and kind of what came before. And then you go, actually, this wasn't some kind of evil plot. This wasn't a negative, this was that when the consumer comes through, it's a liberating shift from what came before. It's an idea that we don't just have to do as we're told. We have the agency to choose. We have freedom of choice. We have the right to, we can make things better in that way. And so it's more of I think that's a really important place to come from. That it's more of kind of what yes, and what might be possible next. How can we move forward, rather than these sorts of polarities of darkness and light. It's a kind of this came from somewhere really good. It was a kind of golden dream, in the era of the Body Shop and Band-Aid, and the year of the Body Shop and Band-Aid, Body Shop floating on the stock exchange, and Band-Aid was the same year that Virgin Atlantic launched and Apple launched the Macintosh. It was all happened in 1984, and that's something deeply poetic and lovely about that. But you're like, okay, yes, and now where do we go? And now what can we step into? And can we build the next story of ourselves? And that for me is what I get really excited by now and try and stare at.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I think just this idea that us as the consumer is quite new, and what I see in that story that you share about this advert is a lot of these paradoxes that exist within the current idea of what being consumer is. So, for example, the environmentalists feeling like they've got to sort of play kind of cheeky at the same game that other big brands are using to get their message across, and then this kind of paradoxical confusion about what is our role as consumers, as citizen consumers in shaping the future, and then on a personal level, I think of my own battles with my own self-belief in doing this project, in that this project is very much about opening up others' self-belief in how they can create the world that they want to live in how we are creating the future, that by how we spend our every moment. And so we can do it with more kind of care, love, trust, design, and that doing this project, because it's never found its own way in the system of
yet.
Never yet. That's never yet found its way to fully sustain itself and actually pay a team so we can go and do all these amazing participatory projects and really tap into this idea bigger. And it's part of the reason that it can't find that funding is because there's no funding body that's there to be like, yes, we're here to just open up self-belief in creating the future that we want, because generally there are other interests that are behind any funding body that are either very specific or that actually, how much do the people, and there are people behind all of these institution corporations, how much is it wanted that each of us do have our self-belief and participatory power? and so I found myself in a paradox there of, on one hand, feeling like very tapped into my own self-belief that we can, we do, we must, and then at the same time a kind of a crisis of self-belief because of not managing to create a project that opens up self-belief and yet fits into the current economic models. This is confusing, but I like that there's this and yet.
Yeah. So one of the things I'm working on at the moment, I'm really excited about. We've got this, but it's stumbling into exactly the same problems, and maybe this is a good place we're trying to hack the consumer confidence index, a measure of success of society, and replace it with a citizen confidence index. And the language in this context of talking about self-belief is really interesting. Like the fact that we have this measure in our societies that's called consumer confidence is so interesting. And and again, it fits beautifully into this sort of story of a shift from subject consumer to citizen. The Citizen Confidence Index was designed in 1967, first done in 1967, at a time when the growth miracle, the economic miracle post-war was starting to ebb just slightly, and they had to kind of codify like what is it that's driving economic thriving. And you went, right, increased consumption drives economic growth, so we need to measure people's confidence to consume, and that's the thing we need to increase. We need to sustain people's confidence they can consume more, because that will. And now you have this, so essentially it's a really simple survey that just asks, like, do you feel confident you can buy more stuff? And that's what we're implicitly, like, the measures we have shape what we do, right? So. And the question we're asking and trying to build is like, well, what if the meta question wasn't to what extent are you confident you can buy more stuff, but was to what extent are you confident you can shape the world you live in for the better, like you can shape your context, and exactly as you say, like you have a lot of really good conversations, and there's just this sort of, but you're trying to do something. We're trying to do something that is. At some level is kind of it's difficult for people to go with, because the idea that people are consuming, the funding models that come from that, the approaches that come from that, are much less threatening to the people who do have power and money at the moment, and are kind of endorsements of where we are and where we've come from, and say kind of, no, you're a good person the more you give away, like, whereas this is asking you to go, don't just try and mitigate the financial lot of many. It's saying build agency, like share agency, open up agency, and that's difficult and deeply and kind of quite. And I don't know, like sometimes I do find myself wondering, do people, is there something something more conscious, more kind of more deliberate, standing in the way of that? And that's what we're. But I don't know. I think the alternatives are starting to look bleaker and bleaker as well. Like I think there is a realization that I think there's a dawning realization. I don't think many people would put it in these words, but I think there is a dawning realization that the consumer story is broken beyond repair. And in this moment, we will either go back to subject story, and the strong men will offer simple answers and as they are doing, or we will step forward. We can't stay where we are. That's not a choice. Mm-hmm. And I think that's And I take, but it's kind of both hope and fear from that.
The people are rising in the background.
Yeah. That might be a nice.
Yeah. Well, I suppose that's the thing, that we have to just keep keeping on, keep having these conversations, keep doing what we can, keep believing that we can do something.
Yeah, and if you're like going back to the people listening to this, to you guys, like the other thing I guess I always say is like look differently. Like when you look for reinforcement that these things are bubbling, that these things are happening, and you will find it, like, because it is happening everywhere. And when you look, like, it's sort of, we use the metaphor sometimes of kind of taking off the consumer glasses and looking with, realising that we are all wearing a set of glasses because we're surrounded by this story so much that we can't help it. But if you take them off and you look for the other stories, you look for the other ideas, then you'll find them and they'll give you more confidence.
I like that. So, do we need citizen glasses, or that's just us?
I don't think so. I think that's just us. We just need to take the consumer ones off.
Awesome. Thank you, Jon.
Thank you.
And your website is
newcitizenship.org.uk.
newcitizenship.org.uk.
Yeah, and if you want more on the kind of the underlying story, there's a report called the Citizenship. That's citizenshift.info, and you can find us in all the usual places and chuck us stuff. We're always wanting to hear more.
Awesome, and we'll post links to that, ways to contact you, and also everything that we've mentioned through this conversation.
Groovy.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Before we sign off on this one, we want to let you know that Jon did keep his promise and become a monthly patron. And instead of £1 a month, he is giving more than that. I can't tell you how much it helps and how much I dream of being able to pay my team a standard hourly rate for the work they do and be able to give more of my time in general to this project. After 27 episodes and with a beautiful growing community, I know that these conversations are important. So if you've listened to one and it has moved you, please do become a monthly patron and share the podcast with everyone you know so more people tune in and go into iTunes and leave us a review. All of this helps to sustain the work that we're doing. We offer this with love and with trust because we know that these stories need to be told. Please join us by visiting www.thefutureisbeautiful.co/community and find a way to participate. And I leave you with this question: how will you create beauty in the world? Thank you for listening. As always, you can find links to everything we mention in this episode, download our book, and discover so much more over on the blog. We don't believe in selling you things you don't need through this podcast, and so it's made possible by you, our community. If you loved this and would like to contribute to our Patreon campaign or join our online group to connect with other listeners, please visit www.thefutureisbeautiful.co and click on community. Please also hit subscribe and leave us a review on iTunes so we can grow. Here is to us, creating a beautiful future together.